After the liberation of Belgorod and Suprunivka, having repelled several enemy counterattacks, the division units rushed forward and, breaking the resistance of the Nazis, at dawn on August 7 liberated Kolonia Dobovoy, and by the middle of the day EOES Tavrovo, the 305th Rifle Division, advancing to our right captured Stara Nelidovka, and to our left the 89th Guards Rifle Division captured Brodok. The fascist troops made desperate attempts to stop the advance of our units. They used in advance prepared defensive lines. Hitlerites clung to every settlement, every height, fiercely resisted. All approaches to settlements and heights were mined and kept under direct and flanking fire of artillery, mortars and machine guns. The enemy often counterattacked us with tanks and machine gunners. Covered by such strongholds, Hitlerites hoped to delay the advance of Soviet troops on Kharkov and to gain time for pulling up their reserves. Before us, the task was set to go forward without reducing the pace of the offensive. Using the tactics of maneuvering and night actions, the regiments of our division stealthily, as close as possible to the fascist positions and swift attacks, broke into its strongholds, repulsing numerous counterattacks of tanks and machine gunners, approached Kharkov. For 9 days, the division liberated 15 settlements and came close to the outskirts of the city. The battles for the settlements Cheremoshne, Lipsy, Rusko-Lazovoy, and in the woods to the north of Kharkov were especially fierce. In a large forest, the enemy had strongly fortified strongholds. The division commander, taking into account the strength of the enemy defences, allocated several assault squads. These squads penetrated deep into the forest and, finding more vulnerable places in the Nazi defence, began to strike. Remarkable examples of courage and bravery showed soldiers of the Rifle Battalion of Captain Pokatayev. This assault squad fought in the forest for 4 days. The soldiers of the battalion bravely threw themselves on machine gun points, on enemy trenches, overcame minefields, engaged in decisive hand-to-hand combat. For 4 days they destroyed 12 bunkers and many soldiers and officers of the enemy. Well fought with Hitlerites in the forest also soldiers of rifle battalions of Captain Bukayev and Major Sitnikov. The selfless struggle in the depth of Hitler's defence ended with the fact that the enemy was exhausted and exsanguinated. He could no longer hold on in the forest. On August 12, a member of the military council of the 69th Army, General Shelakovsky, came to us. He highly appreciated the division's combat actions in the forest area and the liberation of Rusko-Lazovoy. On behalf of the military council of the army, he thanked me and the division commander for skillful leadership of the units and ordered to convey his gratitude to all the personnel of the division and to present the distinguished soldiers for awards. On August 18, our division, having repelled 3 enemy counterattacks at the boundary of Alexeivka and Brickyard, south of Lozovanek, was forced to stop the attacks and move to the defence to regroup its forces. Colonel Govorinenko checked the map against the terrain. To the city blocks of Kharkov was 2 kilometres to 20 minutes of rapid rush. But on these 2 kilometres in deep trenches behind solid minefields was the enemy. Every fold of terrain, every bush, every bunker sent deadly fire. It was a continuous field of fire. Dmitrievich brought binoculars to his eyes. The morning rays of the sun well illuminated the field, but in the hollow separating the southern part of Alexeivka from its northern part, above the Lopan River, there was still a white band of fog. Hillocks floated in it like islands in a flood, and on top of the fog was visible far around. The commander took his time to study the enemy's defence, looked at the grove northwest of the suburban settlement, the height on the slopes of which there was an anti-tank ditch, and from it there was a trench to the northern post and Kharkov. Further to the south of the settlement, along the railroad one could see the chimneys of brick factories. Behind them, over the mutilated city blocks, the sun was shining, and from below, from the bleeding ground, the smoke of fires and columns of dust raised by explosions were stretching upwards. For a moment in Govorinenko's memory arose a picture of the battle for Rozhiev, a year ago, also in August. After breaking through 3 heavily fortified enemy defensive lines covering Arzhev from the north, the 375th Division came close to the walls of the city, but did not have enough strength to break into it from the start. Being at the observation point together with Major General Sokolov, Govorinenko looked at the destroyed city occupied by the Nazis. Peter Dmitrievich learned a lot from General Sokolov. Together they painstakingly developed and prepared each battle conducted by the division in the 42nd. A lot of time, blood and suffering separate that distant period, when the Chief of Staff, Colonel Govorenko, replacing the dead division commander, General Sokolov, led the Ural division to the assault on Rzhev. The division then consisted of the Ural people strong, physically and spiritually hardened in many battles. Now near Kharkov, it was even stronger, behind its back. 2 years of combat experience, participation in the defeat of fascist hordes near Moscow, the liberation of the cities of Kalinin, Staritsa, defensive battles on the Kursk Bulge, the liberation of Belgorod and more than 300 villages and villages. Finally, the rapid August offensive in Kharkov region, and that is why the colonel today must have been confident that the soldiers of his division will be able to break the enemy resistance in their direction, liberate the neighborhoods of Kharkov. On the eve of the decisive hour, as if checking his decision, which determined the direction of the strike of each regiment, he, before giving the order to resume the offensive, again and again carefully studied the field of the upcoming battle, made adjustments to his decision. On August 19, Govorenko set the regimental commanders a combat task to force the Lopan River to occupy a heavily fortified enemy line, the northern post. The main blow was to strike the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment of Major Mitrofan Alexandrovich Nefedov. Of course, Lopan is not the Volga, which the division crossed with heavy fighting for the first time in 41st and the second time in 42nd. The river Lopan was more like our Ural Pishma, overgrown with bushes. In many places it could be crossed by ford, but even such an obstacle is very difficult to overcome under enemy fire. While the reconnaissance was going on, the scouts were continuously reconnoitering. At night they crawled deep into the enemy location and, whatever it cost, collected data about the enemy dragged tongues. These were brave men. On the night of August 19, a reconnaissance group of 5 men snuck into Kharkov, where for 24 hours collected the necessary data about the enemy, and on the 20th returned with a tongue. The reconnaissance group of Junior Lieutenant Nikituk, having penetrated into the rear of the enemy, destroyed up to 20 fascists, seized their documents and also brought the tongue. The reconnaissance group of Senior Lieutenant Sarkissians penetrated into the rear of the fascists, attacked the headquarters of the 240th Infantry Regiment, defeated it, captured important documents for. In this fight, Senior Lieutenant Sarkissians was killed. The group was led by Senior Sergeant Efimov. He led the scouts to their own with captured documents and with the body of the senior lieutenant. The personnel of the units carefully prepared for the offensive. Political workers brought the combat task to each soldier. At the party and Komsomol meetings discussed the tasks of communists and Komsomol members in the battles for Kharkov. And the meetings were held in the trenches, behind the ruins of the brick factory and in the craters from air bombs. About one of them, held in Bukha's battalion. In my notebook I kept such known. An elderly soldier communist Petrov said, "In a street battle, every fighter is sometimes his own commander, his own company and battalion, and his life depends on his own courage, dexterity, ingenuity. So we need to give each machine gunner a few spare discs in addition," suggested machine gunner Ivanov. "Street combat is so complicated," said Combat Bukhayev, "that it is necessary for each officer, sergeant and soldier to be able to independently solve individual tactical problems." In the adopted decisions, it was said that everyone should show personal example in the battle, not sparing blood and life itself, to free Kharkov from the occupants. The party commission of the political department of the division discussed the applications of the soldiers, in which they asked to be accepted into the ranks of the party, in order to go into battle for the liberation of Kharkov as communists. In these days, many applications came from soldiers who especially distinguished themselves in the last battles in the woods to the north of Kharkov, for the liberation of Lipsy, Rosko-Lozovoy, Pomerki, Sokolinka. During the period of fighting at the Kursk Bulge, 990 applications for membership and candidacy for the party were received. During this time, the Divisional Party Committee accepted 736 people as members and candidates of the difference in the figures, those who applied and those accepted, is explained by the fact that some soldiers were killed or wounded and dropped out of the division. As now I see the excited faces of the soldiers, who then handed party tickets. Here is Stepan Tarchev, who with his machine gun platoon cleared the way for the infantry, ensured the liberation of Alexeivka, acted perfectly during the storming of Kharkov and in the battle at Novaya Bovaria. Senior Sergeant Georgy Bogdanov, A scout on August 18 brought the tongue, which was so necessary for us at that time. Soldier Boris Brovin shot down 2 fascist tanks on the outskirts of Kharkov. Senior Sergeant Dmitry Krutikov, despite a heavy wound, continued to restore telephone communication during the storming of the city. The connection worked perfectly, but the communicator himself did not see Kharkov liberated. He died in the evening of August 19 in one of the destroyed premises of the brick factory, which is south of Lozovanek, lined up soldiers of the machine gun company. Company Commander Senior Lieutenant Shuprin told that in the morning Vasily Kurkar, repelling enemy counterattacks, destroyed many fascists, did not let them near the battalion's fighting order. When a group of Hitlerites crawled up to his firing position, he fought back with grenades. The counterattack was smothered, but in the last minutes of the battle an enemy bullet cut off the life of Vasily Kurkar. Here, in front of the formation, the commander handed the hero machine gun to Peter Vasilyev. Taking the weapon, Vasilyev vowed to avenge the Hitlerites for the death of his friend. A lot of troubles were also at soldiers of rear units. It was necessary to pull up ammunition, food, fuel. Deputy Commander of the division on the rear, Major Mikhail Grigorievich Shubin, not knowing rest, provided the units with everything necessary for the battle. Together with his Chief of Staff, Captain Shapkin, he drew up a plan and ways to deliver ammunition and food during the battle. In the infirmary, located not far from the front line, under the guidance of experienced surgeon Pavel Konstantinovich Androfygen operated, bandaged the wounded doctors Georgy Antonovich Popov, Leonid Vasilievich Leonidov, Vitaly Ivanovich Muratov, senior operating sisters Reza Pavlovna Grave, Anastasia Pavlovna Pervushina, sisters Varvara Fadivna Bajina, Galina Prokopievna Lapina, Antonina Alexeyevna Shikova, and many other medical workers of the division. Vasily Vasilievich Shaludev, head of the division's sanitary service, checked and assisted regimental and battalion medical stations in organizing and sending the wounded to the medical unit. And the commander of the medical unit, Alexander Nikolaevich Terenchenko, and his deputy on political part, Boris Nikolaevich Kopylov, had a lot of worries in these days. In the pre-dawn darkness of the 20th of August, battalion commanders gave the order to company commanders to begin forcing the Lopan. Now it was important to do everything quickly and without noise, so that the fascists did not discover the crossing as long as possible. The units in a few minutes lowered rafts, paired logs with machine guns, mortars, Sorokopiatki on the river, and quickly sailed away from the shore. Hitlerites discovered the place of crossing. Enemy machine guns opened fire. Fountains jumped on water. From all sides we heard splashing, heavy breathing of soldiers. Our guns opened fire. Artillery duel began. Soldiers of the 2nd Battalion of the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment Korotkov, Alexatkin Khachaturian, Starovoytov were the first to reach the enemy bank. The raft of Junior Lieutenant Dmitry Pronin, loaded with soldiers with machine guns, came up at the same time, together with the soldiers, who were the first to reach the shore, with a shout of hurrah. Rushed at the enemy and Deputy Battalion Commander Captain Anisim Petrovich Karek. They broke into the trench, destroyed the enemy and ensured the crossing of others. A little to the left landed the rifle battalion of Captain Vasily Nikolaevich Bukayev. He bypassed the Hitlerites' position from the left and together with the units of the 2nd Battalion began to push the fascists. More than 100 enemy soldiers found a grave in trenches and trenches. Many raised their hands up. At dawn, 2 battalions of the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment, having captured the second line of trenches, broke into the forest west of the North Post. Having met stubborn resistance of the enemy, they consolidated on the edge of the forest. By this time, the 1,241st Rifle Regiment, under the command of Major Andrei Nikolaevich Paramoshkin, crossed the Lopans south of the brickyard, captured the enemy trenches and reached the railroad bed. Platoon of Junior Lieutenant Nikolai Korolev reached the enemy bank and attacked the German positions, ensuring the forcing of the river by other units of the regiment. Next to Korolev's platoon, the machine gunners of Junior Lieutenant Stepan Takchev's platoon fought. The crossing battalions were supported by the artillery division of Captain German Malshakov. The heat of the battle was increasing with every hour. The enemy recovered from the sudden swift blow and rushed into a counterattack. Captain Vladimir Klyukin's rifle battalion was counterattacked by dozens of tanks and an armoured train with infantry. The battalion repulsed the counterattack and entrenched at the railroad northeast of Savany Post, imposed a firefight with the Nazis. West of Severny Post, fierce counterattacks were repulsed by Pokotayev and Bukayev battalions of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment. The artillery division of Captain Alexei Baranov supported the riflemen well, who managed to cross their guns and opened direct fire. Distinguished in the Battle of Belgorod and in the battle for the liberation of Rostko-Lozovovoy, the gun crew of Sergeant Alexander Yakovlev was the first to open a rapid fire on the attacking fascists. Being in the ranks of riflemen, the battery of 40-50 of Senior Lieutenant Grigory Mukachev beat from their guns at point-blank range at the enemy machine gunners. Hitlerites, unable to withstand the fire, roared, but soon they again rose in a counterattack. Then counterattacks followed one after another. Hitlerites tried to throw back our units behind the river. Stubborn fights near Kharkov lasted until August 22. With big losses, we reached the city. On August 10th, Konstantin Pavlovich Kazak, the deputy commander of division, Fyodor Stepanovich Datskoev, the commander of 1243rd Rifle Regiment, died. In the forest under the city was wounded battalion commander Grigory Ivanovich Pokotayev and many other soldiers. On August 22nd, the chief of staff of the division, Lieutenant Colonel Konstantin Mikhailovich Lozichko, reported to the division commander on the order received. The commander of the 69th Army, General V.D. Kryochenkin, ordered to storm Kharkov, cut off the enemy's escape routes to the west and southwest, to destroy it. 375th Infantry Division. The order said, due on a decisive offensive in the direction of Severny Post, Kiev, Neft, Kharkov Station, Zalutino, Novaya Bavaria. To take possession of Kharkov Station, further to reach the line, Tsar, Zalutino Station. An hour later, Colonel Gavorunenko gave the order to the commanders of regiments and supporting units gathered at the division command post. All the details of the assault were thoroughly discussed and thought out. In the units and subdivisions, where the situation allowed, we, political officers, together with the commanders and political workers of the units, held conversations, short rallies, and with the same units went on the offensive. I have kept a record of the rally held in Bukayev's battalion and the content of the commander's speech. Ahead of Kharkov, our native Soviet EU addressing the soldiers, said Bukayev, but there are still fascists there. The time has come to repay Hitlerites for all the atrocities in Kharkov region, for the blood and death of our fighting friends. Now we'll go into battle. Beat the damned fascists. Do not let them out of the city alive. Here is the banner which we must hoist over liberated Kharkov. He showed a scarlet cloth. I looked at the excited soldiers and did not see a shadow of timidity and despondency on their faces. Only their eyebrows were furrowed, their lips were bitten, and their weapons were clenched in their hands. There was anger and determination in their eyes. We will not fail, said Soldier Sykarev. Be sure, comrade captain, the banner of freedom will be over Kharkov. At this rally was present, and the head of the political department of the 48th Rifle Corps, Colonel A.D. Syryakov. He made a brief speech to the soldiers, urged them to beat the enemy mercilessly and liberate the city of Kharkov. The same rallies were held in other units. Right from the meetings, the soldiers went on the offensive. Artillery salvo heralded the beginning of the assault. Our division, together with other formations, went to Kharkov. 25 minutes after the signal of the attack, Govunenko heard the first glad tidings. Comrade 05, Mai, the commander of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, reported over the phone. U-2 battalions broke into the northern post. They are clearing the village of fascists. The commander's face brightened. He looked at his watch. The hands were showing 23.50. No matter how people going into battle and battle plans were not carefully prepared, the battle does not always proceed exactly according to plan. Such was the case this time. The left flank regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Arsenty Nikolaevich Kalanin, was delayed by the enemy in the area of the aircraft factory. The Nazis were hitting the attackers from well-equipped firing points. 2 company commanders were out of action. The soldiers lay down. It was necessary to take urgent measures to resume the attack. Deputy Regiment Commander for Political Part, Major Peter Petrovich Gritsenko, ran to where his help was needed. The regiment commander ordered the artillerymen to roll out several guns to an open position and hit the Nazis who were huddled in the aircraft factory. Cursory fire of artillery silenced Hitler's machine guns. Italian commander Major Sitnikov, being in the fighting order of the riflemen, gave the command, "No forward, beat the fascists." Riflemen quickly jumped out of their hiding places and rushed at the enemy. In the center of the battalion ran commander, and behind him, unwinding coils, rushed forward communicators. Having destroyed the group of Hitlerites' cover, the battalion broke into the territory of the aircraft factory. The brutal battle on the territory of the plant lasted about an hour. The fascists were destroyed. The scarlet flag hoisted by the soldier Grichikin rose on the factory chimney. Kalinin's regiment, not lingering on the territory of the aircraft factory, quickly reached Kharkov station and after a short battle liberated it. On the destroyed building of the station, soldiers Kadyrov and Kernov hoisted the red flag. Liberating street after street, the regiment by 9:40 came to Sverdlov Street, where Major Paramoshkin's regiment was already fighting with fascists in some houses, and Major Nefedov's regiment, after the liberation of the northern post rapid rush, broke into the northern outskirts of Kharkov, liberating block after block. By 10 o'clock he threw the enemy behind the river Udi and secured on the line Zalutino. On this battle, the former head of the political department of the 69th Army, General N.A. Vishnevsky, writes, "At 3 hours 30 minutes on August 23 was taken the railway station Kharkov, and by 10 o'clock the southwestern part of the city was completely cleared of the enemy. First broke into the city and started Street Battle's Rifle Regiment under the command of Major Nefedov. Bravely acted the fighters of the unit of Officer Kalinin, who took possession of the southern railway station. Mass heroism was shown by soldiers of the division during the storming of Kharkov. Soldier Tavkan on the northern outskirts of the city took the fight with 15 fascists. He saw a group of approaching Hitlerites. At first Tavkan took them for his own, as they were coming from the northern post. Soon Tavkan was convinced that they were Hitlerites. He quickly took a convenient position. Hitlerites were coming in full height. Having let them at a close distance, Tavkan hit them with his automatic rifle. Several soldiers fell down, but the rest apparently did not understand where the fire came from and ran straight to the outermost house. Tavkan again gave a line. The Nazis lay down and immediately returned fire. When the fighter looked forward, he was dumbfounded for a moment. The fascists were crawling around him from both sides. With a few short bursts, Tavkan killed 3 more. Answering enemy bullets dug into the ground in front of the soldier. Lumps of earth fell on Tavkan, and 1 bullet grazed his shoulder. A fan followed the machine gun burst. Tavkan instinctively grabbed it and threw it back, then fired a line at those who, after the grenade burst, got up and ran straight at him. Again he forced them to lie down. The enemy was advancing. The penultimate grenade was thrown. The machine gun was running out of ammunition. Tavkan already heard someone else's speech. With each second, along with the blood seeping from the wound which he could not bandage, his strength was draining away. With a last effort, Tavkan threw a grenade at those who were closest to him and fired a burst from his automatic rifle at the others. Just at this critical moment of the battle, a machine gun hit the fascists from the flank. It was Junior Sergeant Mikhailov who came to the rescue, and then a multi-voiced friendly hurrah rang out from the left. Soldiers of the 1st Rifle Company of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment of Senior Lieutenant Ivan Menkov broke into Kharkov. From the window of one of the houses, Hitlerites opened fire on the soldiers of the 1st Company. Menkov crawled closer, threw 2 grenades into the window one after another. Communist Krasnikov and Komsomolets Boyakin jumped into the house and took 3 fascists prisoner. In a few minutes, a battle, dozens of resisting fascists were destroyed. The company went forward. On the neighboring street, the machine gun platoon of Junior Lieutenant Morishenkov blocked the way of retreating Hitlerites. In the heat of battle, the machine gun calculation was out of order. Alexander Morishenkov himself laid down behind the machine gun, continuing to hit the enemy. Next to him fired another machine gun, behind which lay twice wounded Stupson. Sarida and Officer Yudich were shooting from automatic rifles. They were helped by the rifle platoon of Junior Lieutenant Akimov, who rushed at the resisting fascists and destroyed them to a single one. How many such episodes there were. It is difficult to enumerate all the feats performed by the soldiers of the Ural Division in the battles for Kharkov. Peter Dmitrievich and I entered the city after the attacking enemy units. In the streets of Kharkov, everything spoke about the past heavy battle. Corpses of Hitlerites, cartridge casings, abandoned German automatic rifles, hit tanks, in the middle of the street, an overturned cart and a killed horse. The fog and smoke that stood over Kharkov dissolved in the rays of the rising sun, revealing a clear sky. The fresh morning breeze striped on many houses shot by bullets and smoked in the gunpowder smoke dozens of scarlet flags, erected by the hands of those who first broke into Kharkov. Those who saw the grief will understand what the appearance of these small red flags on the houses of the city meant at that time. To our common joy in connection with the liberation of Kharkov in the evening of August 23, added another one. The personnel received the third commendation of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, and the division was given the honorary name Kharkov. This news was perceived by every soldier as recognition by the motherland and the party of the special merits of the personnel of the Ural Division in the battles at the Kursk Baluch and in the liberation of Kharkov. For the liberation of the Ukrainian city heroically fought soldiers of all nationalities, all Union republics. Our unity, the inviolable friendship of peoples, won another major victory over the enemy. A few days later, many soldiers were awarded orders and medals. Some officers received extraordinary military ranks. Our division commander PD, Govorenenko, became a major general and was awarded the Order of Suvorov. Shells were still bursting in the streets. There was still a fierce battle on the southern outskirts of the city, and people were already running out of the houses, greeting, hugging, kissing their liberators. On the outskirts of the city, Stepan Levchenko met us. With tears in his eyes, he embraced the commander and said, "Thank you, our liberators. Avenge, dear sons, for the blood of Soviet people. Beat the fascists with all your might." We received words of joy and gratitude also when already our division left Kharkov far behind and fought on new frontiers. On February 23, 1944, a carload of gifts from the workers of Kharkov region came to the division. The gifts were brought by a delegation from Kharkov. With this, Kharkov citizens once again expressed their sincere love for the Red Army, for us, the Ural people. Many years have passed. Some details of the battle for Kharkov have been forgotten, but the feat committed by the Uralians remained in the memory of Kharkiv citizens. They immortalized this feat by naming the secondary school No. 106 on Kotlov Street, after the commander of the 375th Urals Kharkov Bucharest, twice Red Banner Rifle Division, Lieutenant General of the Soviet Union Peter Dmitrievich Govorenenko. In this school, students and teachers organized a museum dedicated to the history and feats of the division. The young generation is being brought up on its combat traditions, stands, where the feats of the soldiers of the 375th Ural Rifle Division are shown, are available in the 49th, 57th and other schools of Kharkov and Kharkov region. After the liberation of Kharkov, we had no time to celebrate. Battles continued. On the night of August 24, the division forced the river Ud near the village Minutka. To our right, this water barrier was overcome by the 89th and 94th Guards Divisions, and to the left, by the 183rd Rifle Division. The enemy made desperate efforts to prevent our units from crossing. Extremely fierce fighting developed after forcing the river for the expansion of the bridgehead. They lasted until August 28. During these days, the division, supported by the 96th Tank Brigade Chelyabinsk Komsomolets, with hard fighting captured the settlements Minutka, Novaya Bovaria, Lipovaya Rosha, Lednoy. On August 29, our division was withdrawn from the battle. It concentrated in the villages of Lednoy and Lipovaya Rosha and entered the reserve of the front commander. The division was putting itself in order, replenishing the much-thinned ranks, celebrating its second anniversary. Not long we stayed in Lipovaya Grove. The division concentrated in the area of Merichik and went on a new offensive. New feats were born. When we reached the attack line, Pyotr Dmitrievich excitedly said, "Nastana judgment, speak, and the Dnieper and the mountains flow 100 rivers, blood at the sea itself." These were famous poems of Taras Shevchenko. Yes, the trial has come. We were advancing. Together with the entire Soviet army, the Ural Division went forward to liberate Ukraine. Left behind was the gigantic Battle of Kursk Bulge, which finally undermined the offensive capabilities of Hitler's army and created favorable conditions for the Red Army to move to the general summer-autumn offensive from Veliki Luki to the Sea of Azov. The fascist troops, having created an engineer-developed defense on the right bank of the Dnieper, the so-called Eastern Rampart, tried to stop the Red Army offensive, to hold important areas of the right bank Ukraine, and to tip the scales of the war in their direction. Fascist propaganda told its soldiers that the Dnieper was the line of defense of their own home. Till the fall of Kharkov, Hitler declared, the Dnieper would sooner flow back than the Russians would overcome it. This powerful water barrier, 700–900 meters wide, the right bank of which is a chain of continuous pillboxes, a natural impregnable fortress. Soldier Karl Hoffmann wrote more reservedly about it to his relatives. Thank God, last night we crossed the Dnieper. Today, for the first time, after the abandonment of Kharkov, we can sleep in peace. The Dnieper is so wide and deep here, and its banks are so high and steep that we feel quite calm. Everyone here, from general to soldier, is sure that the Russians will be stopped. Having made a decision on withdrawal of troops behind the Dnieper, the fascist command tried to gain time for realization of political actions directed on undermining of bases of anti-Hitler coalition, to cheer up the Allies and to support anti-people forces in the occupied countries. Hitlerites rendered stubborn resistance at intermediate frontiers to provide organized withdrawal from the left bank Ukraine, where there was a large grouping of Hitlerites, numbering about 700,000 people, up to 1,200 tanks and assault guns, about 7,200 guns and mortars and 900 planes. They destroyed cities and villages, industrial enterprises, bridges, burned crops, took away cattle, took Soviet people to Germany. The Germans withdrew, covered by strong rearguards left on the heights in the settlements, which were to enable the main forces to avoid the blow of the Soviet troops and keep the crossings on the rivers for withdrawal. In a number of areas on the left bank of the Dnieper, the enemy built strong pre-bridge fortifications. Especially powerful fortifications were in the areas of Kremenchug, Zaporozhye and Nikolaev. For us the offensive was very difficult, because we had to overcome many rivers and liberate villages and towns, adapted for defense by the Nazis. Our Ural 375th, now Kharkov Rifle Division after the Battle of Kursk, that is on August 28, was withdrawn to the front reserve, concentrated in the villages of Lednoy and Ipovaya Russia, where it put itself in order and was replenished with men and weapons. On the night of September 8–9, 1943, by 3 o'clock, having made a march, the division came to the area of Novi Marechik and joined the 53rd Army of the Steppe Front. The task of the Steppe Front was to, advancing at a rapid pace in the general direction of Poltava and Kremenchug, not to allow the enemy to create a stable front and defeat the Poltava and Kremenchug grouping of the enemy. We were sorry to part with the 69th Army, its command and political department, with the Army commander, General Kryushenkin, a member of the Military Council, General Shelikovsky, and the head of the political department of the Army, Colonel Vishnevsky. They captivated us with their simplicity, soulfulness, ability to say a kind word to their subordinates in difficult moments. During the stay of our division in the 69th Army, we managed to love them like soldiers. It seemed to me then that they, as leaders of the army, understood very well the meaning of the words expressed at the meeting of political workers by Mikhail Ivanovich Kelin. Be not only superiors, but also comrades of your subordinates. They always treated with respect and trust not only to us, the leaders of their subordinate division, but also to officers and soldiers. No matter how difficult the combat situation was sometimes, they never shouted, never insulted, and gave their orders and instructions in a calm tone, clearly and distinctly. All this gave us confidence in our strength and determination in our actions when leading units in a combat situation. For all my life I remembered the kind fatherly attitude to people of the chief of the political department of the 48th Rifle Corps, of the 69th Army Colonel Alexander Dmitrievich Seryukov. He very skillfully combined in his work two sides in his relationship with his subordinates, military subordination and comradeship. His kindness was always combined with principled demandingness. We did not want to leave the 69th Army also because the transition from one army to another for the division did not bode well. From such transitions for 2 years of war, our division has already lost a lot. First of all, twice was not brought to the end of the presentation to award the division the title of Guards Military Council of the 30th Army in 1942 and the 6th Guards Army in 1943. Of course, it was difficult to immediately judge the leadership of the new army, to know what their attitude to us would be. Our first meeting with the new leadership of the 53rd Army did not leave a favorable impression on the division commander and on me, the chief of the political department. After this meeting, Peter Dmitrievich sighing, "We'll live, we'll..." Looking ahead, I will say that for 1.5 years of the division's presence in the army, we not only saw, but also felt what we could not even assume: rudeness, shouting, arrogant omnipotence, disregard for the fate of the soldiers of the division. The 53rd Army, which included our division, was advancing in the Poltava-Kremenchug direction. The enemy resisted stubbornly, tried to hold back the advance of the army units at intermediate lines. Somewhere the army offensive was suspended. Then the commander of the army, General Managarov, decided to develop the success from the move through the offensive zone of the 84th Infantry Division to introduce our division into the battle, although it had not yet had time to reach the area of Novi Merchi. The 375th Infantry Division was ordered to concentrate on September 9 by 5 in the morning in the area of Podgorny, to strike in the direction of Minshenkovo, Komintern State Farm, east of the outskirts of Kolmak, and, having seized the road to Vysokoles, Pirikov, by the end of the day to reach the boundary of Malaya Kislovka, height 154.6. To the left comes 214th Infantry Division, to the right, 84th. Overcoming stubborn enemy resistance, the division units launched an offensive. Some units went to the rear of the enemy, struck from the flanks, knocked down his rear guard. The scouts of the divisional reconnaissance under the command of Junior Lieutenant Vasily Nikolaevich Nemchenko, under the cover of night, quickly penetrated into the rear of the enemy and, entrenched on both sides of the road near the village of Pirikop, organized an ambush. Soon the silence of the night was broken by the noise of the engine, and the light of the headlights lay on the road. A German passenger car was running, raising dust. Sergeant Petrov wounded the chauffeur with a machine gun. The car stopped, and before the passengers could recover, Junior Lieutenant Nemchenko and a group of scouts surrounded the car. Having taken 2 officers prisoner, quickly took them to the nearest shelter. A little time passed, as again heard the noise of engines. This time on the road were trucks with Hitlerites. Nemchenko let these cars close, and at his command the scouts opened fire with machine guns and automatic rifles, threw grenades at the Nazis. Stunned by the sudden attack, Hitlerites did not have time to recollect and organize the fight. About 50 fascists were destroyed, 8 Hitlerites were taken prisoner, and there were 5 more automobiles in the regiment. According to the testimony of prisoners, it was established that on the approaches to Kolmak, on 2 heights the Germans created a stronghold, which was defended by about a battalion of infantry, mortars and 3 assault guns. A low visibility wire was stretched in front of the trench, and there was a minefield. The commander of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Arseny Nikolaevich Kalinin, and his deputy and political part, Major Peter Petrovich Gritsenko, having discussed all the issues of the upcoming attack with the battalion commanders and supporting regiment artillerymen, dispersed by units. At 5 no artillery and mortars suppressed the identified enemy firing points. The regiment went forward. Battalions quickly reached the attack line. The idea of the attack was to squeeze the enemy in a vise, surround and destroy him with simultaneous flank strikes. The Hitlerites on the left flank, where the 2nd Battalion was advancing, offered strong resistance. When the platoon of Junior Lieutenant Konstantin Prokopievich Filimonov broke into the trenches of the enemy tanks with infantry appeared from behind the slopes and counterattacked the battalion. Hitlerites were coming in thick chains, firing heavily on the move. Machine guns of Sergeant Alexei Sidorov and Red Army man Boris Mamin started to talk. Our mortars and cannons opened fire on the infantry. Tanks came very close. ATGMs were firing at them. Here was a tank, hit by the firing platoon of the 2nd Battery of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, Lieutenant Valentin Nikolaevich Tutevich. The other 3 tanks continued to move forward. At this critical moment, Private Ivan Voronin rushed forward with a bunch of grenades and hit the 2nd tank. A few minutes later, Sergeant Shishkin's gun crew hit the 3rd tank. The enemy counterattack was repulsed. By the end of the day, on September 12, the regiment liberated Perikop. The enemy tried to delay the advance of the division at any cost. On September 13, having met strong fire resistance and counterattacks of tanks and infantry, the division did not advance. The political report of the political department for September 14, 1943 says, on September 13, the division units repulsed 9 counterattacks of the Germans, who tried to force our units out of their positions. The soldiers of the 1,243rd, 1,245th Infantry, and 932nd Artillery Regiment, sappers and signalmen, showed themselves courageous and steadfast. At the moment of the Germans' counterattack Kazakh-Kiev, a Komsomol member of the 8th Rifle Company of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, advanced with his machine gun to the flank of the counterattackers and opened fire on them, killing many fascists. Notwithstanding the fire of the machine gun, Hitlerites were forced to retreat. Ajadev was wounded, but did not let go of the machine gun handle, continuing to fire, and only after the second heavy wound he was replaced by the second number. For this battle Ajadev was awarded. Soldiers of the fighter anti-tank battery of Senior Lieutenant Krivosheyev met counter-attacking tanks from open positions with direct fire. Having hit one of them, the gunner was seriously wounded. He was replaced by the battery commander himself. Ivan Pavlovich hit 2 more tanks. When our tanks hit the counterattackers, Senior Lieutenant Yuzakbayev with a group of machine gunners surrounded the Germans. Many of them were destroyed, some of them were taken prisoner. In this battle, several enemy machine gunners were killed by Communist Kamalov. During the liberation of the farm, Mishchenkova 1st Rifle Battalion of Captain Bukayev's boldly attacked enemy positions. Germans, having thrown several guns with ammunition, moved away from the farm. From one captured gun, Lieutenant Nikolai Ivanovich Anisko opened fire on the retreating fascists. Captain Bukayev was wounded, but continued to command the battalion. The battalion opened the way for the offensive of other units. In these days, heroically acted an instructor of the 3rd Rifle Battalion of the 1245th Rifle Regiment Communist Vokrushev. He took out from the battlefield together with weapons 31 seriously wounded. More than 50 lightly wounded soldiers rendered first aid. He was awarded with a medal. After a stubborn battle at this intermediate line, having repulsed numerous enemy counterattacks, the compounds of the 53rd Army almost completely defeated one infantry division. The other 2 suffered heavy losses. However, we also suffered many losses. Our division crossed the Shlyakovaya River and, having captured the eastern part of the town of Kolomak, continued to pursue the Hitlerites retreating to Chutovo. The battles for Chutovo were extremely tense. The enemy undertook one counterattack after another. Parts of the division had to bypass the fortifications on the outskirts of Chutovo and strike at the flanks of the defenders. The assault group of the Communist Deputy Commander of the 1st Rifle Battalion of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, Senior Lieutenant Ikala, bypassed the Hitlerites defending in the Grove Kruglaya and suddenly attacked from the rear. During these battles, skillfully and courageously acted many officers and soldiers. Komsomolets Private Peskov went ahead of the platoon and was the first to break into the enemy trench. With a grenade and fire from a machine gun, killed 6 fascists, took their documents. The commander of the squad, Sergeant Selikov, skillfully approaching with his squad to the enemy trench from the flank, opened fire from the hand machine gun and destroyed 12 Hitlerites. Private Shabakov on the approaches to Kislovka destroyed the machine gun of the enemy with a grenade, rose to his full height, with the cry "Forward! Hurrah!" rushed at the Germans. He was supported by other soldiers. Shabakov was the first to break into the trench. He sent 8 Hitlerites to the other world with his machine gun. In a short hand-to-hand fight, our soldiers killed many fascists. In this battle, the company commander Simakov was wounded. The command of the company was taken by the platoon commander, Communist Sergeant Shukov. He raised the company to the attack and was the first at the head of the company to break into Kislovka. Sergeant Shukov was wounded, but until the complete liberation of the village continued to command the company. In these days, with heavy fights, were released from fascist settlements Andryshenko, Kislovka, Miroshnenkovo, breaking the resistance, pushing the retreating enemy. The division units with a fight broke into Chutovo and, seizing the northern part of the town, fought for the crossing. On the night of September 1920, having crossed the river, in cooperation with units of the 84th Infantry Division, completely cleared Chutovo from the fascists. Pursuing the enemy on their heels, the division units rushed forward to liberate the city of Poltava. Neither intermediate defensive lines, nor the introduction of fresh forces by the enemy, nor his numerous counterattacks could not stop the offensive rush of our units, which overturned the covering units of the enemy, broke his defense, chased him further and further to the southwest. During these days, the division liberated dozens of settlements, including Lysikya, Ivanovka, Bolshoy, and Maly Ladishki. Voinovka destroyed many manpower and shot down 8 enemy tanks. Attacking Lysikya, Komsomolets Junior Lieutenant Totolin crawled up to the enemy machine gun. which was firing at the soldiers of the platoon. He destroyed the calculation by throwing a grenade, took the machine gun and opened fire on the enemy. The platoon rose and with the cry of hurrah, hurrah, broke into Lysikia. The platoon was counterattacked, but the trophy machine gun mowed down the counterattacking Germans. When the enemy infantry supported by tanks counterattacked his platoon, Lieutenant Andrei Stepanovich Efremenko crawled up to the tank and hit it with a grenade. The platoon engaged in hand-to-hand combat with infantry and repulsed the counterattack and killed many fascists. But the platoon itself suffered heavy losses. The platoon commander was killed. Dozens of settlements of Poltava region liberated by the division were left behind. About 50 kilometers of land soaked with blood of Uralians, dozens of graves of our dear comrades in arms, and ahead was the river Vorskla, which must be forced. Behind it, the enemy's defense and the city of Poltava. Captain Bukayev's rifle battalion approached the last village before the river. Scouts reported that there were Germans in the village. Combat deployed the battalion in combat order and in the night darkness attacked the enemy. Sudden appearance of Soviet soldiers caused panic among the enemy. Hitlerites withdrew, but quickly coming to themselves, on the outskirts of the village blocked our way. The fight took fierce character. The company of Senior Lieutenant Zolotov, supported by mortars of Senior Sergeant Husnutinov, turned and attacked the enemy from the right. Borisov's platoon knocked the fascists out of the outermost houses. Private Zakharov mowed down the fascists with a machine gun. Komsomol Sergeant Filipchenko, having noticed a group of Germans retreating under the onslaught of our units, opened flank fire from a machine gun and exterminated many enemy soldiers. It began to get light. Fog visibility is almost non-existent, but the battle did not subside. Vasily Nikolaevich, leaving one company to cover, with the rest of the company began to bypass the village on the right through the swamp to approach the crossing and capture it. The soldiers carried machine guns, mortars, PTS. The water in the swamp reached up to the waist. Besides, the high reeds hindered the movement. Despite the huge difficulties, they, not noticed by the enemy, approached Vorskla, where the Germans were crossing to the right bank. The battalion attacked them, but the Nazis blew up the crossing. The battalion began to prepare for forcing. Hitlerites, using the fortifications around Poltava and significantly strengthening the garrison defending the city, tried to hold on the western bank of the Vorskla River. The commander of the 53rd Army ordered the 84th and 375th Rifle Divisions, in cooperation with the units of the 5th Guards Army, to seize the city of Poltava. 1,241st Infantry Regiment of Major Paramushkin and 1,243rd Infantry Regiment of Major Nefedov, on the site Tereshki and Nizhny Mainy in the morning of September 22, under enemy fire began to force the Vorskla River. During the day, having crossed to the right bank, they attacked the enemy positions near Shachabaki. Hitlerites met our soldiers with a strong fire. A fierce battle ensued. Private Mikhail Zakharov took a grenade and crawled to the enemy machine gun. Bullets whistled above his head. When the first bullet hit him, he was already close to the target. It was possible to throw a grenade, but he was not sure that the grenade would reach the machine gun. What Mikhail felt and thought about at those moments, no one knows, and I think it is not worth thinking up anything for him now, a man crawling towards death. He crawled on, clutching the grenade tight. His comrades covered him with their fire. The wound was slight, though it bled. When he reached the right distance, he got up, swung around and threw the grenade. The machine gun fell silent, and the platoon, with a shout of hurrah, hurrah, attacked the enemy and broke into the city. Together with the platoon went and Mikhail Kalinovich Zakharov. The fight was heavy. The soldiers of the 1,241st Infantry Regiment of Major Paramushkin were among the first to break into Poltava and hoisted the red flag on the building of the party committee of the plant. Then, together with units of the 84th Infantry Division and the 5th Guards Army, as well as our other regiments, began to clear it of fascists. Buildings skillfully adapted the city to the defense. Buildings turned into firing points, mined the approaches. The fascists stubbornly resisted. In some places the fight reached hand-to-hand combat. Hiding behind the houses, Mefodi Antonuk's machine gunners penetrated deeply into the enemy's location, silenced his firing points. Captain Bukayev's battalion cleared several blocks from Hitlerites. In the course of the battle, the soldiers of the battalion captured 2 mortars with mines and, turning them towards the retreating Germans, opened fire. When we entered the city, we saw a terrible picture. Buildings were burning, explosions were heard, streets, roads, many public buildings and residential houses were mined. The sappers of Major Klopov's battalion had to work. It's about sappers in the people, a long-standing good fame. Those who were at the front are grateful to sappers for saved soldiers' lives. In Poltava, our sappers demined passages. Roads paved the way for units to facilitate and accelerate the forward movement. By the morning of September 23rd, Poltava was liberated from fascist invaders. The surviving inhabitants came out to meet their liberators, hugged and kissed soldiers and officers. "Our liberators have come," May says, an elderly woman. "How we have been waiting for you. Be well, my sons, destroy Hitler's monsters." Residents told about Nazi atrocities in the city, how they tried to knock down the Monument of Glory, established in honor of the heroes of the Battle of Poltava, when the troops of Peter the Great in 1709 defeated the Swedish army of Charles Xy, which was considered invincible. The 375th Division, without stopping in Poltava, continued to pursue the retreating enemy units in its own direction. The enemy was retreating to the southwest to the Dnieper River. In the days of celebrating the 30th anniversary of victory, I was in Poltava. It is impossible to describe the impression the city made on me. Clean streets, newly built houses, buildings of industrial enterprises and public buildings. I share my feelings with the director of the turbo-mechanical plant, Boris Vasilievich Shumaiko. I tell him about the changes that have taken place in the city, about new houses, stores, new plants, factories. Poltava is renewing itself, getting younger, Boris Vasilievich adds. We drive through the city. At the corner of Pushkin and Kotlyarsky streets stands a monument to the unconquered Poltavians who, led by the underground party organization, fought heroically in the rear of the fascists. The names of the underground fighters are carved on the granite. Boris Vasilievich says that in Poltava there are many monuments to the heroes of the battles. More than 30 streets are named after them. The most expensive for Poltava, Citizens Memorial Complex in the Central Park. The monument of soldiers' glory bayoneted to the sky. Around it there are plates with the names of heroes who gave their lives for the motherland. The memorial is crowned by a heroic figure of a warrior liberator and a three-sided pylon on which is carved, "The glory of heroes is immortal. At the foot, eternal flame." The city military commissar Colonel Ivan Fedorovich says that 480 remains of fallen soldiers have been transferred here. Among them are soldiers of the 375th Rifle Division. We honored their memory with a minute of silence. Then we drove up to the bank of Vorskla, where our division forced it on September 22, 1943. I look at the hills on which in those years were the Germans, who turned the entire western bank into a solid fortified area. Here they decided to keep the city at all costs. Standing on this boundary, mentally brought myself back to those days, as if once again listening to the rumble of battle. I saw the cold morning of September 22, thick fog, frantic artillery and mortar fire of the fascists, and a solid wall of fire of our artillery on the enemy positions. Under the cover of this fire, our boats departed from the shore. The water was boiling from the bursts of enemy shells and mines. I remembered the glorious soldiers of the division, battle comrades, with whom I went shoulder to storm Poltava. These days I visited the secondary school across the river, where in September 1943 there was an observation point of the division commander. I visited the Regional Museum of Local Law. In the museum, numerous exhibits vividly tell about the heroism and bravery shown by Poltava citizens in the Great Patriotic War. I was only somehow offended for the soldiers and officers of the 375th Ural Kharkov Rifle Division who fought, and many gave their lives for the liberation of Poltava. Their feat was not reflected on the stands of the museum. Some digression. I do not agree with the commander of the 53rd Army, Lieutenant General I.M. Managarov, who in his book In the Battle for Kharkov of Kharkov Publishing House, on page 204 states that allegedly the 84th Division liberated more than 80 settlements, including Kolmak and Shutovo Vaityo. This is untrue. It is unfair and unworthy for the author, especially for the commander of the army, to belittle the exploits of soldiers of other formations who participated in the liberation of these settlements. This is sacrilege to those soldiers of other formations, including soldiers from the 375th Infantry Division, who, liberating Shutovo, Kolmak, Voikovka, gave their lives. The 375th Infantry Division fought in the 53rd Army for more than a year and a half, starting on September 9, 1943, and until the end of 1944. Army Commander Managryov, describing the numerous battles of the army, including for Poltava, Kremenchug, on the Dnieper on the territory of Russia Salgary, did not find a single warm word about the soldiers of this division. In general, he kept silent about this division, as if it had not fought in the 53rd Army. Obviously, the former commander, describing the battles of the year and a half, conscience drove away from himself. His conscience did not gnaw at him for the ruined lives of many soldiers of the 375th Division, when he threw it from place to place on the most dangerous parts of the battle to plug the holes of the army, threw it into battle without artillery and tank support. Soldiers of the division were carrying out his orders at the cost of life and blood. Is it possible to forgive him for a lawless, immoral act, inhumanity, when by his order without trial and investigation was shot in front of the formation, the commander of the 1245th Rifle Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Kalinin Arsenty Nikolaevich, a favorite of the personnel, an excellent commander, a man devoted to the motherland? He was shot only for the fact that the soldiers of his regiment in one section of the battle, under the pressure of the superior enemy, moved back 150-200 meters. It was an arbitrary action. There is no and will not be a pardon for him. However, about this a little later. Kremenchug was an important communication hub on the left bank of the Dnieper. The Germans by all means sought to hold it as a bridgehead for the offensive on the left bank Ukraine. Von Manstein called Kremenchug in his order Bridge City. On the outskirts of Kremenchug, escarpments were opened, wire barriers and minefields were set up. For defense were pulled up selected troops of the Nazi army, divisions of SS Reich, Great Germany and others. Here was concentrated a large amount of looted property and food for shipment to Germany. Here were tens of thousands of people, collected from the surrounding villages for stealing to fascist Germany. But our tank and mechanized units, having cut off the ways of escape to the enemy, did not give an opportunity to drive them over the Dnieper. The 375th Division, pursuing the retreating enemy, overturning his intermediate lines, liberated the settlements Sudnevo, Pashepty, Yuziki, and others. At one of the sites of Kremenchug district, soldiers of the 1241st Infantry Regiment saddled the road on which the Germans were retreating. A fierce battle ensued. The fascists sought to break through to the Dnieper at any cost. They threw tanks and armoured personnel carriers with infantry against our riflemen and artillerymen. The gun crew of Ivan Vasiliev from the division of Captain German Malyakov let one of the German tanks close and set it on fire. But other tanks continued to attack the gun. Vasiliev got into single combat with several tanks and hit another one. By this time, other batteries of the division had time to turn around and open fire on the enemy tanks. Machine gun platoon of Komsomol Lieutenant Ninshev opened fire on the infantry. In the midst of the battle, the first number of one of the machine guns was killed. The platoon commander, Ivan Nikolaevich himself, lay down behind the machine gun and began to shoot the attacking enemy infantry at point-blank range. Ivan Savlievich Polikarpov's battalion attacked the Hitlerites. The enemy, leaving many corpses and wounded, was forced to retreat. This battle was skillfully led by Major Bezborodov, acting commander of the 1241st Rifle Regiment. At dawn on September 28, the division came to the eastern bank of the Sil River. Advanced units with a fight forced it. However, the enemy, numbering up to a battalion of infantry with tanks several times, went into counterattack, and by 6 o'clock knocked them out of the right bank of the Sil River. Ours suffered heavy losses. By 16 o'clock, 1241st Rifle Regiment again forced the Sil River in the area of Omolnik. Under heavy enemy artillery fire, the 1st Company of Lieutenant Dementiev crossed the river and entered the unequal battle. The Germans 3 times counterattacked his company, but each time received a proper response. During the hand-to-hand combat, Dementiev was wounded, but continued to lead the battle, received a second wound. For this heroic deed, he was awarded the order. A group of soldiers of the 2nd Rifle Battalion was raised in an attack against the counter-attacking enemy by the battalion's Partizan Senior Lieutenant Garipov. The group, having repulsed the counter-attack, broke into the village of Potoki on the shoulders of the retreating enemy. By the end of September 28, regiments of the division, pursuing the retreating enemy, breaking his stubborn resistance, broke into the northeastern outskirts of Kremenchug. The command of Hitler's army ordered its troops to fight for Kremenchug to the last soldier. Hitlerites fought desperately. Parts of the 375th Division, interacting with parts of the 5th Guards Army, started fighting in the streets of Kremenchug, clearing the city of fascist machine gunners. By the end of September 29, the division had completely captured the northern part of Kremenchug, and by the morning of September 30 reached the southern outskirts and the left bank of the Dnieper. On September 30, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief Marshal of the Soviet Union, Stalin, for the excellent combat actions declared gratitude to all troops who participated in the battles for the liberation of Kremenchug. Among them were soldiers of the 375th Kharkov Rifle Division. German troops retreating from Kremenchug blew up bridges over the Dnieper and fortified themselves on the right bank on commanding heights, from where the whole valley on the left bank of the river from Kremenchug to Kleberda was viewed and shot. The 375th Infantry Division was ordered to concentrate in the area of Dzhuba and Drovetsky, and on the night of October 4 in the band of the 48th Infantry Corps to force the Dnieper, in cooperation with the compounds of this corps, to strike at the enemy in the direction of the eastern part of Lake Podpilno, height 149.3, to seize the height and gain a foothold on the boundary of height 111.3, southern slopes of height 143.3. A little digression. Once after the war I visited these places where in October 1943 my native Ural division fought heroically. Here it is, the Dnieper, beautiful, proud, mighty, majestically rolling its waters through the rapids to the Black Sea, and I still see the old fiery time. I stand on the shore and can't take my eyes off the high blue waves. The past days are revived, the pictures of heavy battles of the division for its forcing and on the bridgehead come to life. It seems to me that the river is boiling and bubbling under enemy shells and air bombs, and the waves are not blue, but murky black. The river is on fire, the sand and water from the ruptures rising to foamy, sparkling columns of water. Rising up, the column of flame seems to hit the clouds and then falls to the ground. I stand looking at the river, the third largest in Europe. What an amazing destiny it has. It contains the fates of many generations of Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian peoples, their joys and hardships, as if the Dnieper symbolizes the indivisibility, blood kinship, community of all the people living along its banks. I am walking along the left bank, trying to revive it in my memory as it was in October 1943. Is it possible to forget that October night, when the soldiers of the division on boats and rafts rushed to the right banks? The fight was hard, cruel. From some sinking boats, soldiers under fire threw themselves into the cold water, swimming to reach the shore. However, not all of them reached it. If the film could capture day by day all the battles, what exciting episodes of the feat of arms of the soldiers of the division it would tell about. There are such moments when today's life is interrupted by a meeting with the past, makes you look at the world with different eyes, at your actions and deeds. Once again, remember those people to whom you are indebted. It becomes disturbing to think whether the memory is not shrouded in a haze of forgetfulness, whether we, the participants of these great battles, have managed to tell the younger generation at what price the peace of our people was won. It is with great anxiety and pain that we, war veterans, perceive the way some mass media, all-knowing journalists, are slandering, trying to blacken the history of the great patriotic war, the victory over fascism, the feat of the people and their soldiers. Such views deprive some people of their sanity. It is impossible to educate young people, future and current defenders of the fatherland, on the ruins of the national history. At that time, the enemy wanted to divide the Ukrainian people by the Dnieper River, to tear Ukraine from the great Russian people. The soldiers said no to that, but 40 years later, we found some clever politicians who could think of nothing more clever than to destroy the union of the Ukrainian, Russian, and Belarusian peoples, to divide them, denying their past, thus betraying their peoples. One can feel palpable bitterness from the lines of the document signed by them. Thus they realized what the fascists had dreamed of for many years. As a result, the political and economic instability in these countries is now creating the favorable soil on which the seeds of the coming cataclysms in social life are growing. Being on the shore, I look at the Dnieper, although it is not the same anymore, not a free horse in the field, but saddled with concrete dams, not a river as it was then. But the Dnieper Dazimisk, reservoir up to 10 kilometers wide. Memory brings me back to those days, and before me, one by one, the images of fellow soldiers who performed the feat that raised them to the top of immortal glory come to life. Many of them laid their heads here forever. The lives and deeds of these people were a perfect example of the mighty rise of human spirit, service to great ideals, to their people. When I returned from the Napier, I turned to my yellowed from time hastily made front notes, extracts from archival documents, letters of my fellow soldiers. I keep them as great relics. They are very dear to me. In behind each line there is someone's feat or death of my fighting friends, comrades, fellow soldiers. Thoughts. What power in them? Then, like a rocket, at the highest speeds, overtaking time, will take me forward, then back, for tens of years in the years of war, to past deeds, events. I read my notes. The division forced the Dnieper. 3 words, but they can tell a lot about the soldiers of the division who made immortal feats, to tell so much that cannot fit in several volumes. I am afraid that I will not be able to tell separately about each of them, or to name at least the name of each participant of this great battle for the Dnieper. I will limit myself only to a few episodes, to what I know. By the end of the day on October 3, the division was concentrated in the area of Garaguri-Juba, where it was scouting the crossing and preparing for forcing. The units did not wait for special crossing facilities to arrive. They knitted rafts, searched for fishing boats, dragged logs, planks, empty barrels, i.e. everything that holds on water and on which it is possible to cross the river. I came to the 1,245th Rifle Regiment, which was the first to force the Dnieper. I wanted to talk to the soldiers before the heavy battle, to help the commanders and political workers in some way. The place for forcing was not very convenient. The right bank had steep precipices, slopes of heights, from which the whole left bank was well viewed and shot at. But perhaps the most important thing was that according to the intelligence and the testimony of prisoners, we found out that the enemy in the area of Kryukovo, Uspensko, strengthened the units opposing us with fresh forces of the 320th and 39th Infantry Divisions, pulling them up from their reserve. The enemy in advance fortified the height along the right steep bank, built a dense system of fire, using superiority in terrain. In such an area, the commander of the 53rd Army ordered our division to force the Dnieper. The Dnieper surged with steep, muddy waves. It was necessary to overcome almost half a kilometer water barrier under enemy fire. Lieutenant Colonel Kalinin, the kindest man, charming, modest, gentle with his subordinates, commanded the 1,245th Rifle Regiment. Arsenty Nikolaevich was awarded for the Kharkov battles with the Order of the Red Banner. He told his commanders that we were fighting for the motherland, for its honor and freedom, and we would die for it too. And the motherland entrusted commanders with the right to manage people and even send them to death for the sake of victory. That's why we should never forget, worthily evaluate the labor of our subordinates, treat them sensitively. We should not approach them all with the same measure. Here, during such a conversation between the regiment commander and company commanders, and I caught Kalinin on the bank of the Dnieper before the beginning of forcing. He demanded to thoroughly check the personnel's outfit, equipment, fitting, the availability of ammunition, and the serviceability of weapons. The regiment was assigned the task to force the Dnieper, capture the bridgehead near Uspenskoye, and ensure the forcing of the main forces of the division. That evening and night I met with many officers, soldiers, communists, Komsomol members of the regiment. All of them were on standby for the forcing. Talking with them, I was once again convinced that all human feelings in the war were as if naked. Nobody wanted to die. This desire to live, faith in life led us, soldiers, through the heaviest, bloodiest battles to victory. And now people were ready to throw themselves into the abyss of cold Dnieper water for the sake of life. This psychological readiness of soldiers to force was created by the daily work of commanders, political workers, party and Komsomol organizations. Behavior of soldiers is not the same in the attack, going on land, and in the battle conducted on the water from a boat or raft, which are a target for the enemy. Fighting on the water requires special courage, heroism. We had such courage. This courage ensured our victory at Moscow, Kursk, and in other battles. We were stronger and more united now. Of the sappers were clattering in the reeds. They, who had not slept for several days, were carrying logs, building rafts. A sapper knows that a cubic meter of wood can withstand 300 kilograms of weight on the water. and who has calculated how much a man can bear in war. Seeing me, Captain Logachev came up to me and reported what the sappers are doing, what has already been done. I can see from his inflamed eyes that he and his men did not even sleep an hour these days. I see how skillfully wields an axe our famous sapper Sergeant Nikolai Sapozhnikov. He, a former soldier, knows the music of battle by ear. The sergeant, during the years of war, up to the Dnieper many times penetrated together with scouts into the rear of the enemy, cleared minefields, removed wire barriers, paved the way for scouts. Not without reason, this brave sapper has the Order of the Red Star and the medal burning brightly on his chest. And now he will lead the first raft with fighters on the right bank. Not far from him, strengthen log sappers Sergeyev, Pozdenyakov, Prokodko, Kishkin Bay. The regiment commander calls Senior Lieutenant Gallagher. You, Ivan Fedorovich, had the great honor to go forward to storm the Dnieper. I think there is no need to remind you once again of the importance of the task entrusted to you. I trust you and your subordinates. Take care of your men. Their lives and the success of the task depend on you. We will fulfill the order, replied Gallagher. After Ivan Fedorovich left the regiment, Commander Kalinin, as if thinking aloud, said, After all, many of us, without hesitation, will give their lives for the country. But we need victory, and only the living can bring it. The Dnieper surged with steep waves. In the darkness, boats and rafts were silently lowered. Soldiers with machine guns, 45mm guns, mortars were loaded. Mikhail Trinatsko, the regiment's commissar, jumped on the first raft with a machine gun laden with grenades. Without artillery preparation rafts, boats were departing from the left bank. Cold waves, hitting the sides of the overloaded rafts, threatened to topple them into the abyss of murky water. A gust of wind drowned out the splashes of oars. And boats were operated by experienced sappers. The boat on which was Senior Lieutenant Gallagher led Sapper Sergeant Sapozhnikov. We, who remained on the shore, anxiously listened, trying to catch murmurs, rustles, more and more often looked at the clock, waiting for news from the shore about the landing of our men. The minutes dragged on for a very long time. A little to our right, the artillery was beating, imitating the crossing. Our advanced rafts reached the right bank unnoticed, counting on surprise justified. Gallagher's group attacked the enemy. A fierce firefight began. Hitlerites, realizing that after the first echelon of the Dnieper will begin to force the other units, dropped on Gallagher's group, on the left bank, as well as on the Dnieper, the power of artillery fire. The Dnieper was boiling and roaring with explosions. It was hard for those advancing on the sand. The chains were lying down and then rose again under the fire of machine guns and machine guns of the enemy. Our machine guns did not shoot well. All of them were clogged with sand. Dawn dawned. Gallagher's group, with the cry "Hurrah!" rushed forward and broke into the trench of the enemy, and in a fierce fight the Germans were knocked out of the trench, thrown back. The bridgehead was recaptured. Other battalions of the regiment began to force the river. Not far from them began to force the Dnieper units of the 1,241st Infantry Regiment of Major Paramoshkin. First, under enemy fire, swam to the right bank of the warriors on a raft, built by a group of Komsomol members on the initiative of our Odesset, Komsomol leader of the regiment, Senior Lieutenant Vladimir Shabat. Later I learned that the Komsorg begged the regiment commander to organize several Komsomol assault groups. Major Paramoshkin, approving the desire of the Komsomol to build their rafts, organize assault teams and the first to reach the right bank, but still noted that it is not worth separating the Komsomol and communists from non-partisan. We need to go together, so that there was someone in the crucial moment of battle personal example to inspire soldiers to defeat the enemy. The commander of the regiment advised the Komsorg and the partour of the regiment to correctly place the communists and Komsomol members in the units, well tell them what their role is during the forcing. Still, the Komsomol leader achieved the construction of one Komsomol raft in the assault battalion. This raft was the first to reach the right bank, but not reaching the shore a dozen meters. The Komsomol raft scratched the bottom of the coastal rock. The Komsorg was the first to jump into the water with the cry of "Follow me!" Hurrah! Shooting on the move, tireless Vladimir Kononovich led the Komsomol members forward. They were met by the machine gun queues of the fascists. One after another fell, hit by enemy fire, several Komsomol members. They fell as they ran. Putting forward their automatic rifles, it seemed as if together with their comrades they wanted to destroy the fascists, to stay in the battle formation. It is difficult to describe the rage of the soldiers when they saw their fallen comrades, those with whom they shared the hardships of front life, a piece of bread, a pinch of tobacco. They rushed to the trench of the hated enemy with a thirst for revenge for their fallen comrades. The majority of fascists of the fighting guard were destroyed, so they paid off the Hitlerites for the death of their fighting friends. Fighters had no time to recover after this fight, as fascists gathered forces, rushed in a counterattack to throw the landing party into the river, not to give to create a bridgehead, but Komsomol members stood firm, beat back the counterattack. When there was a moment of calm, the soldiers looked around. Behind rolled the muddy waves of the Dnieper, in them the blood of brave men who gave their lives for the liberation of Ukraine. Under the cover of Chaban's group began to arrive, to land on the right bank other boats, rafts of the assault battalion. Sapper Pozdenikov made 15 trips across the river during the day, delivered soldiers to this bank and back wounded. I note that Komsor Chaban then participated in the reflection of more than 10 counterattacks of the Germans on the bridgehead and personally destroyed many fascists. In this connection, I would like to note one more initiative of Vladimir Chaban. When the division units were widely deployed sniper movement, especially in the defensive battles near Moscow and the Kursk Bulge, Vladimir Kononovich organized a group of Komsomol snipers in the regiment. It included the best shooters of the regiment. Together with snipers, the Komsomol leader went out on hunting. On his personal account were dozens of exterminated fascists. When we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Komsomol during the hot battles on the bridgehead, the political department received an order from the commander of the 75th Rifle Corps, Major General Anisimov, which said, for the initiative to organize a sniper group, which killed 348 Hitlerites, for the skillful arrangement of Komsomol forces at forcing the Dnieper River, where the Komsomol showed a leading role, for the good educational work of the Komsomol organization. I declare gratitude to the Komsomol leader of the 1241st Rifle Regiment, Senior Lieutenant Shaban Vladimir Kononovich. Retired Colonel Vladimir Kononovich, as a military relic, carefully keeps a yellowed sheet with the order of the corps commander. When one of the groups of attackers of Captain Klyukin's detachment was about 100 meters away from the shore, rockets on the right bank soared to the sky. Fierce firing began, shells and mines bursts raised water columns around the rafts and boats. Sergeant Sergeev hurried the rowers. Suddenly an enemy shrapnel broke the homemade oar of Private Petrov. Shell bursts merged into a continuous rumble. There was nowhere to hide from the bullets and shrapnel. The soldiers were dying. The wounded Salikov cried out. Blood ran down his face. The sergeant commanded fire, and himself gave a line from a machine gun. Others also opened fire. When they were 30 to 40 meters to the shore, a shell burst overturned one of the boats. Warriors, floundering, spitting out the water in their mouths, swam to the shore. The other boat, pierced by shrapnel, began to sink into the water. Petty Officer Bespalov commanded. All overboard, take the machine guns. The first to jump into the water, holding a machine gun above his head, was Private Kuznetsov, followed by other soldiers. The water was up to his chest. The Germans were beating from mortars and machine guns. Our artillery from the left bank opened fire on them. On the right bank, bursts of our shells. The enemy could not delay the rapid rush of our soldiers. The third raft hit the right bank. Immediately out of it jumped on the sand Lieutenant Ivan Kinishev, commander of the machine gun platoon, followed by Red Army men Zakharov, Kuzin, and they ran forward, dragging machine guns on the loose sand. They lay down. At one machine gun lay down, prepared for battle Junior Sergeant Serigin. In the neighborhood entrenched Sultanov Sabirov. Away from them, the department of Sergeant Vladimir Svistunov set up his machine gun. Not far away lay, tightly clutching their automatic rifles, and shooters Shishin, Alexandrov. And at that time many more boats came to the shore. The ground was shaking from shells and mines bursts. Fascists rushed on soldiers of Captain Klyukin's battalion, tried to throw them into the river. By fire of machine guns, automatic rifles, grenades, our soldiers repulsed the first attack. Soon the Germans came for the second and third time, but these attacks were also repulsed. The battalion lost several soldiers. Mikhail Zakharov and some other soldiers were seriously wounded. Confusion began among the young soldiers who had just been drafted in the liberated areas, but the voice of combat, Vladimir Antonovich, his forward, for the motherland, overlapped the noise of battle. The soldiers rushed to attack the enemy trenches dug in the sandbank. Our artillery from the left bank intensified fire on Hitlerites' positions. The fight on the bank was short, but fierce. Taking advantage of the enemy's confusion, Komsomolets Borja Rakimov captured a German machine gun in hand-to-hand combat and opened fire on the Nazis. Captain Klyukin's battalion crushed the Germans and occupied a narrow strip of right bank land. But it was so small that the enemy, who was on the height, saw on it every hillock, every bush. Here the fascists directed their fire. The battalion withstood the fire attack. The soldiers took shelter in sandy trenches, just reclaimed from the Germans. The ground shook from explosions. Sand trenches collapsed, filling the soldiers in them with sand. Spitting sand stuffed in their mouths, wiping their eyes, the soldiers fired at the invading enemy, crawled from the destroyed trenches to other trenches. Yellow streams of sand, like snakes, crawled into the trenches. Everywhere sand, leafless shrubbery on sand dunes fighting the wind. Captain Klyukin decided that to linger here, on a patch of loose sand, cannot. It is necessary to act to expand the captured bridgehead. He skillfully organized the battle and led his brave men to attack the enemy positions. The bridgehead was somewhat expanded near the village Uspenka. The soldiers then nicknamed this place Valley of Death. Within 24 hours, under the cover of Captain Klyukin's battalion, other battalions of the 1,241st Rifle Regiment crossed the river. In this battle, reflecting German counterattacks, many soldiers, including the battalion commander Captain Vladimir Antonovich Klyukin, were wounded of varying degrees of severity. The command of the battalion was assumed by Senior Lieutenant Viktor Ivanovich Zolotov, who led the battalion forward to further expand the bridgehead. By the end of October 4, 1,245th Rifle Regiment of 500 men, 1,241st Rifle Regiment of 430 men came out with heavy fighting in the area of Lake Cheryakovo, Reshaita, and began to repel the attacks of the Nazis who attacked them, to expand the bridgehead. On the night of October 5, the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment of Major Nefedov, consisting of 430 men, crossed the Dnieper and came to the area of Lake Rishitz. The following armament was transferred to the right bank: regimental 76mm guns, 9 45mm guns, 2 120mm mortars, 5 82mm mortars, 18 machine guns, 15 hand machine guns. In war, it is very difficult and scary for everyone, for everyone is exposed to mortal danger. Death walks near. Everyone feels fear. There is nothing shameful in it. Only some overcome fear faster, own themselves better, others worse, and some those who are cowards are despicable. Without belittling in any way the role of soldiers of different branches of the army who showed military valor and heroism in the war, I would like to emphasize that it is always harder and more dangerous for infantry. After all, the enemy is always in front of it. It fights for every meter of the native land. And as long as there are armed forces on earth, the queen of the fields will never lose its importance. Defense on the battlefield for infantry is the Mother Earth, and the piece of land which we took possession of on the right bank of the Dnieper did not protect the warrior very well, for it consisted of sand. It was impossible to dig in. Everything crumbled under the soldier's shovel. It was difficult to run on the loose sand. The boots got bogged down. The wind picked up sand and threw it in the face and eyes. Besides, this piece of land was open as on the palm of the hand. From the heights it could be seen through and shot by the enemy in this so-called bridgehead. The division fought hard for more than a month, both for its expansion and for gaining possession of Uspenka, Deryevka, Novogrigorievka, and other settlements on the right bank of the Dnieper. Stasi rifle regiments of the division stubbornly held the captured positions, step by step reclaimed the bridgehead from the enemy. Under their cover, the 932nd Artillery Regiment of the division forcibly crossed the river. Captain Sokolov was the first of the artillery regiment to cross. Appearance of artillery on the right bank was, by the way. At dawn, the Germans again bombarded the positions of the regiments of the division with the fire of their artillery, mortars, and went tanks. Under the cover of tanks, the Nazi rose to the attack. But the accurate volleys of Sokolov's artillerymen stunned the Germans. They did not expect artillery fire from the right bank. Fire platoon of Lieutenant Mikhailovsev hit the first tank. Gunner Sarpov from Grigoriev's calculation hit the second machine, and the third tank was destroyed by Komsomolets Babushkin. The ranks of our cannoneers were also melting. Komsomolets Alexeyev died a brave death. Gunner Supov was wounded. Captain Sokolov took the gunner's place and hit the fourth machine. The shells were running out, 2 guns were broken. Then the artillerymen hit the fascists with machine guns and machine guns. Sang Commander Senior Sergeant Zuravlev killed 3 fascists. Next to him fired on the attacking fascists Petty Officer Valentinenko, Red Army man Timofeyev, Loader Barnashev, Gunner Kazantsev and others. In the center of this fight suddenly found himself the communicator Alexander Iskuzhin, who was fixing a break in the telephone cable, when a German tank appeared not far from him. He ran up to our silenced 45mm gun, the calculation of which was put out of action, and having loaded it with several shells, hit the fascist machine. After the battle, Iskuzhin said that he had no time to recollect after all that had happened, as a fascist with a gun in his hand came out of the tank and rushed at him. But Iskuzhin killed him with a shot from a carbine. Our division newspaper in defense of the motherland wrote about this feat of the communicator. The note ended with the words, "The heroic son of the Tatar people acted alone against the fascist hulk and shot it down." To fight like the communicator of our unit, Comrade Iskuzhin. For this feat, Alexander Iskuzhin awarded the Medal for Bravery. Before the war, he was a Stakhanovit, a turner of one of the Ural factories. The next day, the Germans, having pulled up the reserves, struck a blow to the flank of the rifle battalion of Captain Vasily Bukayev and tried to get to the rear of the battalion and cut it off from the crossing. The enemy, after treating the battalion's position with artillery fire, rose to the attack. Enemy machine gunners, running from bump to bump, from hillocks to bushes, approached the trenches of the battalion. Warriors from all kinds of weapons poured lead on the enemy. Since the evening put on the flank of the anti-tank guns beat direct fire, fascist machine gunners, unable to withstand the fire of the battalion, lay down and then rolled back, leaving dozens of corpses. However, the battalion also suffered losses. After some time, Hitlerites bombarded Bukayev's battalion. Tanks and infantry again went on the attack. Soon one of the enemy tanks was hit, but several of them broke through the fighters' trenches and rushed into the depths, followed by the infantry. In some places, hand-to-hand combat ensued. Mortar Commander Gatolin was firing at the attackers until the last mine. When the mines ran out, the calculation began to mow down the fascists with automatic rifles. Gatolin ran out of ammunition. He was surrounded by Germans. He got into hand-to-hand combat, all wounded, was not given alive, fighting back until he was struck by an enemy bullet. He fell to the ground, which he defended at the cost of his life. Orderly Vavilov was leading a wounded fighter to the rear. He turned toward the enemy and saw that the enemy infantry was approaching, and not far away stood a silent machine gun. "Crawl, dear, yourself. If I can cope with the beast, I will help you later," he said to the wounded, and immediately jumped up to the silent machine gun and opened fire on the fascists. On the bridgehead, perhaps, the most difficult test for soldiers is when enemy machine guns, cannons, tanks are beating on you at point-blank range, and you have a rifle or automatic rifle and a grenade in your hands, and there is nowhere to wait for help. The river is behind you. Enemy machine gunners began to approach the trenches of soldiers of the battalion of the deputy commander of the regiment. Major Pokotayev jumped out on the berm of the trench and with the cry of "Hurrah! Hurrah!" dragged the soldiers behind him into the melee. The fascist could not withstand the blow and rolled. A platoon of machine gunners of Junior Lieutenant Mefodey Antonyuk struck a blow to the flank of the retreating enemy, and, pursuing him, was the first to break into the enemy trench. The battalion occupied the second trench of the Germans. The bridgehead expanded by hundreds of meters, but these meters cost us dearly. Many soldiers were wounded, some of them mortally. The Dnieper was the last combat frontier for Major Pokotayev Grigory Ivanovich. In a cruel and bloody battle near the village of Uspensk, he died a death of the brave. During the battles on the bridgehead, no matter how the situation, the soldiers were always fed. Cooks Karayev and Radnik prepared food on the left bank during the day and delivered it in thermoses to the right bank, to the front line. There were cases when they and their men also repelled enemy attacks. Our foreman, with these words fighters' artillerymen, expressed their respectful attitude to Pavel Davidovich Shmakov, who constantly took care of the soldiers. He was awarded the Medal for Combat Merits. Cook Andrei Moskalev forced the Dnieper in the first assault group. Winding and hilly sandy terrain allowed the Germans to maneuver forces and equipment. Taking advantage of this, on October 10, they attacked several times a handful of soldiers of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment. On the right, a machine gun burst from Samarin Ivan. A minute passed. Another, the Germans' frequent shots crackled, enemy mines and shells began to tear at the positions of the regiment's soldiers. Samarin saw the Germans running to his right. He realized they can attack. The Germans then lay down, then quickly ran forward. Samarin directed the fire of his machine gun at the attacking Germans. A deadly battle ensued. Again the barrels of machine guns burned hands. Again bursts of enemy shells and mines kicked up clouds of sand and dust. Every minute the battle was getting stronger and stronger. Covered by hillocks and bushes, enemy machine gunners were crawling along the sand right on Samarin's machine gun. Ivan set the sight, took aim and, when the fascists jumped up and rushed at him, pressed the trigger of the machine gun. The fascists fell under the machine gun fire. The enemy increased the fire on Samarin's machine gun. The second machine gun, number Ibragimov, was wounded. Having opened a strong fire from machine guns, Hitlerites again rose to the attack. Again Samarin met them with machine gun fire. The fascists lay down. A fragment of an enemy mine wounded Sergei. The fascists again crawled to the machine gun. Samarin, angrily, wiping the blood from his face, shouted to give the tape, although he knew that Ibragimov and Sergeyev were killed. He crawled himself to the box. It was the last one. And then he felt a strong pain in his shoulder. There was no order to withdraw, so to fight. Overcoming the pain, he gave a line at the enemy. Enemy mines lay more and more often around the machine gun. When all the ribbons were shot, Samarin began to fire from the machine gun, but the cue of the enemy machine gun killed Samarin. Sergeant Kozlov's detachment destroyed many Hitlerites. The group, led by the regiment's commissar Lieutenant Tranatsko Mikhail in hand-to-hand combat, exterminated the Germans and held the position. Mikhail was wounded. Mortarman Sabadze, when the mortar was broken, entered the battle with a machine gun. Anatoly Pozharov's battery hit a tank, but another enemy tank crushed this last gun. Artillery soldiers fought off the invading enemy with machine guns and grenades. Private Polyvada set fire to the second vehicle with an anti-tank grenade. Several tanks, having broken into the positions of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment, began to irrigate the trenches of the riflemen. The machine gunners of the regiment were firing at the enemy infantry, cutting it off from the tanks, firing at the tanks' observation slips, throwing grenades. Private Borisov destroyed Hitlerites in front of his trench with several fans. Enemy tanks came almost closely to the firing positions of the 5th Battery of the Art Regiment. Gun Commander Sergeant Ivan Ivanovich Bunin and Gunner P.E.A. Martinenko, Loader Sergeant I. S. Popov hit the tanks at point-blank range. After the third shot, one of the tanks was hit. When the gun of the 1st Battery of the Artillery Regiment was crushed by an enemy tank, Gunner Zobilin Alexander Andreyevich from the automatic rifle exterminated many fascists who were attacking him, was severely wounded. Liaison officers of the CAD platoon, Privates Motovailov and Klyazov, under enemy fire, eliminated more than 30 breaks in the communication line and ensured control of artillery fire. From time to time, together with riflemen, they engaged in battle with attacking fascists. Fixing breaks in the communication line, Savetsky entered the battle and killed 2 Hitlerites. Junior Sergeant Kaislev, 3, Uzagbayev, an officer. Vorenkov, crawling on the sand under enemy fire, fixed more than 10 line breaks during the day. Sergeant Tanshinsky, Private Garilov also worked heroically to eliminate breaks in the communication line. The tension of the battle was growing by the minute. The soldiers of the regiment fought hard, evil. How long this fierce battle lasted, it is difficult to say. In this scorcher was, and the regiment commander Lieutenant Colonel Arsenty Kalinin, who managed the battle. Lines of communication with units now and then cut off by shells, mines, caterpillars of enemy tanks. The liaison officers did not have time to fix them. For some time the regiment commander lost control of the battle. The soldiers fought bravely, but the forces were unequal. Uncontrolled handfuls of soldiers, one after another, under the onslaught of the enemy, began to leave their positions and retreat to the Dnieper. The regiment commander was confused and failed to show firmness, to take measures to stop the trembling soldiers. The Germans began to approach his observation post. Lieutenant Colonel Kalinin, afraid of falling into the hands of the Nazis, left his observation post. I did not and do not consider him a coward. He was a strong-willed, militarily competent commander. For skillful leadership of the battles on the Kursk Bulge and for Kharkov, he was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. I think that in this difficult situation he could not overcome his soft, friendly character, for which he was loved by the soldiers of the regiment. But at this critical moment of the battle required commander's firmness, determination, or not showing these qualities at the right time can always ruin the case and the officer himself, especially in war. On this dramatic day, as luck would have it, the commander of the 53rd Army, Lieutenant General Ivan Managrov, was on the bridgehead. He, having learned about the withdrawal of the soldiers of the 1245th Rifle Regiment, called the division commander Major General Governenko to him, and without listening to him about what had happened and the measures taken, without speaking, ordered Governenko to go to the regiment and personally shoot the regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Kalinin, in front of the line. "Ad you do not fulfill my order, I will personally shoot you." This order of Managrov maliciously violated Soviet laws and was immoral. It seems to me that it was an instinct of self-preservation. Managrov was afraid that the Germans would come out to his observation post. Major General Governenko, in the heat of the moment, not understanding the illegality of Managrov's order, callously, blindly carried out the criminal order. Governenko directed the fire of his gun against an honest defender of the fatherland, who had travelled the fiery roads of war from the city of Kalinin to the Dnieper. This could not be forgiven to Pyotr Dmitrievich. Urgent decisive measures were taken to consolidate the retreating units of the 1245th Rifle Regiment in order to create a fist to strike at the enemy who broke into the regiment's positions. Much was done in this regard. Officers of the headquarters and political department of the division. Instructor of political department of the division, Major Akhmyatsyanov, Mukhaim Akhtamyanovich, led a hastily assembled regiment in a counter-offensive, and with the support of a reconnaissance company and other regiments' artillery, mortars, by the end of the day the position was restored. On that day the division suffered heavy losses in personnel, in material and armament. The Ukrainian land forever embraced many soldiers, sergeants and officers, including the commander of the 1245th Rifle Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Arseny Nikolaevich Kalinin, who was killed by a fatal shot. Any loss is irreplaceable, but it is especially bitter when a soldier is killed by a shot of his commander as a result of non-compliance with elementary requirements and gross violation of the law. Nothing can justify such losses. For the blood and lives of the soldiers of the divisions who fell on the bridgehead, the military council and the staff of the 53rd Army, and first of all Lieutenant General Managrov and General Gorofov, who ordered the division to force the Dnieper where the place of forcing the natural conditions of the proposed bridgehead, the enemy forces were poorly or completely unexplored and unstudied, bear moral responsibility to a certain extent. What pushed them to force the Dnieper where the whole valley, to the future bridgehead, was viewed and shelled from the crests of heights? The right bank, where the division planned to advance, was steep. The height of precipitous slopes reached 150 meters. They could be reached only by climbers, but not by soldiers under enemy fire. Only after almost 2 weeks of bloody battles, the senselessness of the offensive here was realized and the order was given to stop it. The soldiers of the division in the battles on the bridgehead showed the highest fortitude, courage, and bravery. They survived the fierce hours, days, lost track of time and counterattacks of the enemy, losing their battle friends. On October 17, 1943, the newspaper Pravda, many great deeds committed for the glory of the motherland, saw on its banks the grey Dnieper, but all former feats pale before the feats of the Red Army soldiers. There has never been such a thing on the banks of the Dnieper, which is being done there now by fearless Soviet soldiers. Before the Dnieper battles, more than 2 years the war had been raging on our land. Our division participated in many major battles. I was an eyewitness to countless feats of soldiers, sergeants, officers of the division, but such mass selflessness, such heroism of soldiers, which I saw during the forcing of the Dnieper and in the battles on the bridgehead, has not yet been. They shook my heart, leaving a deep trace in it. Having assessed the situation on the bridgehead, the unsuccessful choice of the place for forcing and the development of the offensive after forcing, the front commander ordered the compounds of the 75th Rifle Corps on the night of October 18 and 19 to cross to the left bank of the Dnieper and proceed to a new line of action. In accordance with this order, our division crossed to the left bank and, having once again crossed the Psil River at the site of the collective farm Shevonaya Zaria, Konoplayani, having made a 15-kilometer march, and for the third time forcing the Dnieper under enemy fire, concentrated in the area of Kotsevalovka. According to intelligence, the Germans fortified themselves in the area of Uspensky Omelek and Novogrigorievka. Under the cover of night, the division's units moved to the initial position for a decisive rush forward to seize the village of Novogrigorievka. The fascists fortified themselves on favourable defensive lines. The approaches to the village were cut by a network of trenches. There were bunkers and guns for direct fire.